All right, let's unpack an absolute masterpiece of Elizabethan theater. We're looking at Christopher Marlowe's Edward II. If you're looking for a fast-paced political thriller that perfectly combines intense personal obsession with a kingdom-shattering civil war, you are in the exact right place. This explainer is going to give you a complete, structured breakdown of the entire play, and we're really going to focus on the scene-by-scene plot and the major power players who drive all this chaos. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our playbill for today. We're going to march chronologically right through all 5 acts, starting with the prologue, moving through acts I to IV, and ending with a very brutal Act V. Prologue, the King's Secret. Let's set the stage just before the curtain actually rises. This play compresses a massive 20 years of actual English history into one seamless, breakneck dramatic narrative. It kicks off right around 1307 with the death of the fearsome King Edward I, famously known as the Hammer of the Scots. The dying king leaves behind a kingdom completely fraught with tension over his son's absolute favorite companion, a lower-born knight's son named Gaveston, who the old king has actually banished from the realm. And the story stretches all the way to Edward II's dark and tragic end in 1327. Keep that vast span of time in the back of your mind as we watch these events unfold. The court conflict hits you right out of the gate. It's the ultimate clash of personal desire versus public duty. On one side, we've got the new King Edward II and his intense, emotionally charged obsession with his favorite, Gaveston. On the other side, the dying will of the old king and the deeply entrenched English nobility who view Gaveston as a massive threat to their traditional power and the stability of the entire realm.
Act 1. Return and Exile. The old king is barely in the grave when the new king lights a political powder keg.
The very first thing King Edward II does is instantly recall his banished favorite back to England. Let's put a spotlight on the man at the center of this storm, Gaveston. He is wildly arrogant and entirely contemptuous of the English nobility. When Gaveston first shows up, he's just gloating over the king's letter. Almost immediately, 3 poor men approach him asking for work, and Gaveston casually, cruelly toys with them before brushing them off. It perfectly nails his self-serving nature before he even holds an ounce of real power. Now you might be wondering, why are the nobles so furious? Interestingly, it's not purely driven by homophobia or jealousy. The king's obsession with Gaveston is literally an open secret. The elder Mortimer actually tells the others to just tolerate the king's behavior, pointing out famous historical male companionships like Alexander and Hephaestion. But his nephew, the younger Mortimer, totally disagrees. For him, the real issue is Gaveston's insulting arrogance and how recklessly he's bleeding the kingdom's wealth dry. So, how do the nobles handle this? Well, initially, the Archbishop of Canterbury forces the king to sign a banishment order. But then, the younger Mortimer pulls off this incredibly cunning 3-step political maneuver. First, he convinces the nobles to actually recall Gaveston to England. Crazy, right? But here's the genius part. Once Gaveston is back, they can isolate him from the king's direct protection and then assassinate him without technically launching a direct rebellion against the crown. It is a brilliantly calculated, chilling move.
Act 2. Blood and Rebellion. Gaveston returns, and things escalate fast.
That fragile scheme collapses almost immediately, and the nobles' outrage reaches an absolute boiling point. But before the swords come out, we need to talk about Queen Isabella. Early on in the play, she is desperately trying to win back her husband's affection. She even helps persuade the nobles to recall Gaveston just to make King Edward happy. But as the king continues to publicly neglect and insult her in favor of Gaveston, we witness this tragic shift. Her allegiance slowly starts drifting away from the crown and right into the arms of the younger Mortimer.
And honestly, her shifting loyalty makes complete sense when you look at the absolute state of the realm. The king's obsession is quite literally destroying England. The treasury is completely drained by his extravagance. The commoners are overtaxed and restless. French territories are lost, Scots are raiding the north, and Danish ships are controlling the seas. The nobles lay out this damning catalog of failures to justify their extreme actions.
This catastrophic failure of leadership makes civil war completely inevitable. King Edward's forces clash with the rebellious nobles, and Gaveston is ultimately captured. Despite being promised a fair hearing, the fiercely anti-Gaveston Earl of Warwick intercepts the prisoner and ruthlessly beheads him without a trial. This is the massive turning point of the play's first half. The king's favorite is dead.
Act 3. The Spencers rise. The play now jumps forward a full decade to a startlingly familiar situation.
We see this incredibly tragic cyclical motif emerge here. King Edward learns absolutely nothing from Gaveston's brutal murder. Zero. Instead, he simply replaces him with two new favorites, Hugh Spencer the Younger and his father. So the exact same conflict just repeats itself all over again. The nobles are just as outraged by the Spencers' sudden rise to power as they ever were about Gaveston.
Leading this renewed opposition is the younger Mortimer, who has really stepped up as a major power player. The nobles declare open war yet again, but this time, at the Battle of Boroughbridge, King Edward's forces actually win. The king executes his enemies and captures the younger Mortimer, locking him away in the Tower of London. So, for one brief, fleeting moment, Edward has secured absolute power.
Act 4. The Queen strikes. That absolute power turns out to be a total illusion.
The political tide permanently turns against King Edward II. If you track the shifting factions here, the sheer chaos becomes obvious. The younger Mortimer manages to escape the tower and flees to France, where he joins forces with Queen Isabella. Together, they launch a full-scale invasion of England. Just look at the Earl of Kent. That's Edward's own brother. He starts out completely loyal to the king in Act 1, but Edward's disastrous rule pushes Kent to flip his allegiance to Queen Isabella in Act 4. This invasion forces Edward to flee for his life to Wales, and tragically, Kent later flips back again, deeply regretting his betrayal.
Act 5. A brutal end. We now enter the final, darkest act of the tragedy.
Edward is captured in Wales, his new favorites are executed, and he is entirely stripped of his crown and his dignity. Now watch how Mortimer builds a truly terrifying grip on power. He and Isabella rule as regents behind the young boy king Edward III. First, they force King Edward's formal abdication. Then, using brutal jailers named Gurney and Matrevis, they secretly move the former king between grim, horrific dungeons just to completely break his spirit. Finally, Mortimer issues a famously ambiguous, plausibly deniable order to have the king assassinated without taking the direct blame himself.
To carry out this incredibly dark task, Mortimer brings in a thoroughly chilling character named Lightborn. As a professional murderer whose very name evokes Lucifer, the light bearer, he travels to Berkeley Castle. This perfectly sets the stage for one of the most harrowing and infamous scenes in all of Elizabethan drama.
Down in a filthy dungeon, Lightborn speaks to the exhausted king with this false gentleness just to lower his guard. Then, with the help of the jailers, King Edward II is brutally murdered. The implied historical method of this execution is completely internal, leaving no external wounds. It's a physically devastating, intensely symbolic demise that is specifically designed to insulate Mortimer from the crime. And to tie up loose ends, the jailers immediately kill Lightborn to eliminate the only witness.
But the truth always comes out, right? One of the jailers eventually confesses and produces Mortimer's written warrant. At this point, the young King Edward III finally steps up and asserts his own authority. He orders Mortimer's immediate execution for treason, imprisons his own mother, Queen Isabella, in the Tower of London, and mourns his uncle, the Earl of Kent, whom Mortimer had just executed for trying to mount a rescue. The young king even orders Mortimer's severed head to be brought in and presented at his murdered father's hearse.
Which brings us to the very end of the play, and leaves us with a massive, provocative question. Does King Edward III's ascent to the throne finally break this bloody cycle of favoritism, rebellion, and revenge? Or does it merely start a brand new chapter of it? It's a fascinating thought to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me for this fast-paced explainer of Christopher Marlowe's unforgettable political thriller. Keep analyzing, keep exploring, and I'll catch you in the next one.